All right. I think we're live here. So we'll get a quick chat going here. Just make sure that everybody can hear me okay. I see Paige saying hello, everyone. So hopefully that means that she can hear me as well. Quick sound check here. Just making sure that everybody can see it. Got some thumbs up. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me on the second most exciting live presentation of today, obviously with the rover landing on Mars. And looks like we are good here. So hopefully everybody can see that up on the screen there. And today we are going to talk a little bit about delegation and automation. So excited to walk through this topic with you. This one's near and dear to my heart. Spent a lot of time working on our internal processes and systems. And before I kick everything off, I'm going to give myself a quick introduction. So my name is Will McMillan. I'm the VP of Community and Technology. So a lot of the automations that you see here at Cultivate are sort of the brainchild of mine. As we've worked to build things out and streamline our own internal processes, it's something that we often work on with our clients as well. And so today we're going to go through and we're going to talk about how to bring some of this stuff into your own business. So the purpose is really to create time and space while growing and scaling through automation and delegation of tasks within your business. So the outcome of what we want to figure out today is, how do I free up time? How do I get more space as an owner in my company to tackle big projects, to take on new initiatives, and just get out of the daily grind? And so today's agenda, we're going to walk through why build a delegation and automation system. So not just thinking about individual pieces, but how do you build a whole system around this? We'll walk through some different ways to automate and delegate, and then we'll go through some systems to scale. So how do you take these individual pieces now and build an entire scalable system? And then we'll have some time here today to take a quick look at something called Zapier as an example, and wrap everything up with a Q&A. So a couple things, we'll have some guest speakers as we're going through here today. If this is your first webinar, you'll see them pop on about halfway through, and we will go from there. So couple things. Why build a system to automate and delegate? Well, there's a lot of complexity, obviously, in different people's businesses. And so at the end of the day, you want something that's running and giving you repeatable results. You don't want cars coming off the line that all look slightly different, have defects. You want consistent, repeatable results as an owner. And you just want that machine to keep churning and keep cranking them out, because at the end of the day, we want more time to be going and jumping in our big either pool full of money or hanging out in the beach, maybe drinking a Corona. You'll also see that I like gifts, so we'll be going through those a lot as we go through here today. But time and money are the two big motivators typically when we're looking at delegation and automation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start by talking about a 5-step workflow to really lay the groundwork and the framework that we're going to need to be able to build those scalable systems as our company starts to grow. And so what we're going to end up with is this automation and delegation workflow on this first part today, where we're going to fill in these 5 bullets along the way. And then we're going to talk to our friend Kyle down in Texas, who hopefully has power and will be able to be on here with us. So, the Fight Club rule is where we're going to kick everything off in terms of number 1 here. So quick question in the chat here. Who remembers the first rule of Fight Club? Anybody old enough to remember the first rule of Fight Club, or have seen that before? Throw that in the chat if you know that. Kyle, you have power. That's good. Never talk about Fight Club. That's good, Colin. Thank you. There are no rules. It's not quite it, but it's good. So the first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club, right? And so we're going to start off with the first rule of automation and delegation. And the first rule here is that you never automate or delegate that which should have not been done in the first place. And the reason is because you can end up with a whole rat's nest full of stuff that shouldn't have been done in the first place. And it really can slow you down and create a lot of issues in your company. So often when we're looking at, I want to automate or delegate something, it's because as owners we're drowning, right? We feel that way often, and somebody comes by, they can put our legs underneath us, and then all of a sudden we realize, oh, there's some firm footing here actually that we can stand on. Or we take this task and we dump it on an unsuspecting teammate. We go, somebody else deal with this, take it over, you run with it, I don't have time to deal with this right now. And so the other thing that we'll often do is we'll go and spend waste a bunch of time. So we'll spend 10 hours trying to automate something that we could have done manually in 10 minutes, right? And so the key here is that we need to be ruthless about what are we looking at automating and delegating, and does it even belong in the business in the first place? Let's start with that as the main filter. because that's going to make sure that we're prioritizing our time in tackling the important things in the company, and not just spending time on fluff. And so, quick poll here in the chat: have you ever dumped a task or wasted time trying to unsuccessfully automate a task? So throw it in the chat there. Just want to see some insights here. We got a lot of yeses. Vince says yes every day, which is a little bit worrying considering we work together, so it's good. Lots of yeses, of course. It's called learning. I like it. It's good. So we got lots of yeses in there. All right. So and it was his auto response. It's good. So there are no nos. It's good. Most people have experienced something like that in the past, right? In terms of the business. And so for the folks that are yeses, like, I feel your pain. And often what ends up happening is we just make things worse, right? We overcomplicate things, or we don't support people on our team. We end up with turnover. It just takes a small problem and makes it a much bigger problem. Now the task isn't even done, and now we actually have to go clean up the mess and actually do the task ourselves. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about how we can actually get out of that cycle, given that we know rule one now. So we're going to talk about what's next. How do we make sure now that we won't waste time? What do we need to tackle on here? So step 2 with automation and delegation is that it requires you to be clear on the destination. Okay. And so when we're thinking about where we want to end up with any of this stuff, we're looking for consistent, repeatable results with little to no input by you, okay, as the owner. And so I'm just going to blow that little part up there in the bottom right-hand corner. Consistent, repeatable results with little to no input by you. It doesn't say no input by you. And that's one of the biggest hurdles that people have to get over. Often we look at automation and delegation as this, this promised land over there where I'm going to have this business, it just runs on its own. That's usually not the case. These systems still require management by you. And so you need to consider that whenever you're actually building out one of these along the way. So number 3 here is that we're going to make our bulleted list, and we're going to start with the big bullets of how something works. And I'm going to explain what this actually means as we move forward here. So this is our tool. It's a bulleted list, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3. It's very fancy. It's the most underutilized tool in building these things out, because what you're going to do is you're going to go, okay, what is this task that I'm doing? What does it need to do? What's the outcome or destination that I need to end up at? Let me map out all of the steps that I go through when I actually produce this myself. And so the key here is that you've got this big process that you have in place, process, Canadian, flip between the two as we go. But you need to eat this elephant one bite at a time. Right? You can't eat the whole thing. It's usually too big. And so we need to actually go through and break this down into smaller pieces to actually make this feasible. And so one of the things that I use as an example here is I'll often go through this process in terms of recruitment and specifically interviewing when I'm working with owners to break down what their interviewing process looks like. And eating, you don't eat elephants. I don't recommend eating elephants. It's a metaphor. So hopefully we're all playing along there. So that's good. But when you look at recruiting here, this is often what happens when we go and do a brain dump with somebody in terms of all of the things that they're currently doing for recruiting. So they're going to create a job posting. They're going to find and file the existing job postings. They're going to upload that job posting. They're going to review the resumes. They're going to interview them, and they're going to decide. And this is typically, the high-level first bullets that we're going to work with. But what ends up happening is we take one of these little bullets, and in this case, it's review resumes, because the outcome that this person is looking for is to have another person on their team take over this entire recruiting process for them. Well, when I ask them, what do you review in the resume, we can drill this bullet down so we get more insight. So they're looking for things like industry experience, education, how much have they changed jobs, previous time at employers, attention to detail, the general spelling and formatting of the overall thing. So they said review resumes was the step that they actually had to automate, but there's about 6 or 7 sub-bullets under there. And even under industry experience, we can probably drill that one down even further and better refine our process and system here. So what we want to get out of is just throwing something over to somebody else and saying, just do this, get it off my plate. And the reason is because we have spent so much time doing this that we assume that you go A, B, C, D, and you don't realize that there's A1, A2, A3, A4 because you naturally do it. You are so used to doing this process now, it just happens. And so we need to slow it down and map it out so that we can take them piece by piece and explain to somebody else how you're getting the great results that you're currently getting so that you don't have more of a mess that you're taking over when you come back to it. So if we look at this, we build our bulleted list and we do our first initial dump. And then we go to each bullet and we think through, well, what are all of the small things that I'm actually doing on each of these bullets? And we expand on the bulleted list and we drill it down one more level. And then we do it again. We go back to the next one and then we do it again. And then we do it again until we can't think of any more of the steps that we're actually doing on this. And you're going to end up with a really long list of all of the things that you do to make yourself successful. Now, what we end up with is something that we can also take and turn into a checklist. And this can be like a really useful tool then for somebody to use to execute at a much higher level than if you just ask them to go and do it right off the shelf. Four, we're going to look at how people are involved in our process, and then we're going to look at our technology second. And so we want to build our processes, we want to work out the kinks on paper, and then implement technology. People are smarter than computers, and so we can work a little bit more dynamically to figure out some of the issues along the way. And then we're going to layer in technology to accelerate our process on it along the way. And so the way I break this down is we're going to look at option one, which is brains, and then option two, which is bytes. And so before we begin, we, again, just reiterate, both of these require time to set up and maintain. And again, this goes back to rule number one, which is why we never automate or delegate that which should not be done in the first place. And so just to give you a quick little example of how this could work, this could be a financial example of a process that we want to sort of decouple and think through, like, how are we using brains and bytes along the way. So if our destination is that we want to have consistently produced reconciled financial statements every month by the 10th, we're going to need a few different pieces to be able to implement that process or system and delegate it to somebody else. So one of the first things that we'll probably tap into is a brain. So in this case, we're going to look at a bookkeeper. We're going to use them. They're going to help set up the chart of accounts. They're going to start to tag all of our transactions to the right spots. They're going to set up all of our reporting, all of those other things. A computer can't just naturally go and figure some of that out. We're going to move a lot faster by working with our brain first, getting the systems all set up, and then we can use software to make this go faster. So for example, in QuickBooks, which could be some software that we layer in here, we can start looking at repeating transactions. We can use some of the functionality in QuickBooks to automatically code some of those transactions. That will reduce the amount of stuff that the bookkeeper has to do so that they're only doing things that aren't repeating. And that way we're leveraging the brains where we need them, and we're leveraging the software where we need it as well. The next piece then is to then look at, like, how do we start to bring this together into a management system as we start to grow and scale, which we'll talk about a little bit later today, is now we want to actually look at building out a recurring appointment. So in this case, we're going to get all of the brains together for financials, and we're going to get all the bytes together in terms of the reports and the computer systems to have a consistent meeting to make sure that this is working every single month. And so it doesn't mean that it'll just run and that we can't look at financials now moving forward, but it gives us the framework that we can actually get into the details and understand what it is that's going on financially every single month consistently. So just to kind of summarize as we go through this, we've got our 5 steps. So don't automate or delegate that which should not be done. What is the destination or outcome that I'm looking for, and being clear on that? You build out your bulleted list and keep iterating through and getting it more and more detailed. We're going to look at the brains and the bytes then in terms of the pieces that we're going to either delegate or automate. And then we're going to build the system piece by piece. And generally speaking, we don't want to try to tackle the whole thing all at once. We want to take parts and then expand our scope of control over time. So that will be a really important piece as we continue to go forward here, is that generally speaking, getting all of the items in your bulleted list right the first time is too much. You need to figure out which ones add the most value, which ones are really important to have consistent outcomes on, and then focus on them and move forward from there. So with that, Vince, I'm going to ask that Kyle, I see you jumping on here. Kyle is coming up on stage with me. Welcome, Kyle.
Hi.
We've got Kyle joining from down in Texas here, so he's got a battery backup running. One of our big what ifs for today's presentation was, what are we going to do if Kyle does not have power? So we've brought Kyle on here today. He's going to talk a little bit about automating business systems. He's one of our senior advisors. He's been with Cultivate for a lot of our growth here. He's worked with a ton of clients of all different sizes. And so I'm just actually going to stop my sharing here, which should throw Kyle back up on this screen. Just need to move a couple things around here. So Kyle, couple questions here for you today. In your experience, like what are some of the common pain points, I guess, that you've seen with people who are working to automate or delegate different tasks in their business?
I think the pain points being one thing, and then how do you find automation opportunities? So maybe I'll kind of take that in a couple different directions. But
sure.
I'd say the problems that are observed when what do you see in your business that might trigger you to look for an automation possibility? Is you see a workflow that doesn't connect. So as you alluded to, you need to have your process mapped out, put together your bulleted list, break it down, understand what you need your process to look like in your business. And then when you're using different softwares at different points or having these different touch points through this journey and they're not connecting, is a good sign that there's probably some technology that can help. Similarly, if you're having to put data into different points of that process, so we manually enter it in the CRM and then we manually enter it into Asana for our workflow management. We're manually entering things into our proposal system and then into QuickBooks for billing, right? That redundancy would indicate that there's probably an opportunity to improve automation. And then, as we have certainly experienced in our growth, and as many of our clients have, having a clear plan and then tracking actual to that plan is super important. So the more automated or the less manual that reporting of actual data can be in relation to the plan is a great one, right? So if you're looking at you set your goals, you got your team working on things, and if every week or every month you're having to manually roll up data in pursuit of tracking kind of where you're at plan to actual, that would be a pretty good indicator of let's try to automate that so there's less effort involved.
Awesome. So just a couple things here just to highlight that I think are important here is that you talked about having like data living in different systems but not really connecting together efficiently, right? And so that's one piece of this. And then also just the need then from a people standpoint to take information from one system and then re-enter that same information into another system, for example. And it just takes time and energy and all of that as well. And it introduces a lot of variability, we'll say, too, into the company because people may not get the right data in the right spots. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Awesome. And what in your experience, like what are some of the solutions that you've worked on with different clients or that you've come across to solve some of that?
I think there's if you're trying to figure out like, okay, now I found a problem, and then what do I go do now in order to fill that gap? A lot of times there are native automations that exist. I know Zapier is one that we've talked about a lot. There are a handful of others that help to bridge the gap between software. I think if you don't know how to connect something or you don't know what tool to plug in somewhere and you know that automation is the solution, maybe look harder or look again. It seems like there's new technology that's coming out every day. That is getting more industry specific. So if you looked 6 months ago, it's entirely possible that there's something new on the market now. I think another one is look for something that's close and see if you can work with the owner or the developer of that to tailor or customize something. It's something that you might end up paying for, or it's something that they hadn't thought of. And so if it's helpful to build it for you, then it's helpful for their business model as well. And so then they might do it with you and for you. We're fans of Google Sheets and Excel around here. And as previously stated, right, like just build it first, keep it simple, go figure out how you can set it up in a simple Excel, Google Sheet type of format, prove out what system you need. And then if you do need to look at going and making something permanent based on that, it'll be a lot easier to take that to a developer for custom design when you have kind of a framework already built than if you're just trying to go cast vision and hope they get it. So look some more, find something close and see if you can customize it. And then if nothing else, good old Google Sheets.
I like it. Yeah. One of the Excel is probably the most underutilized piece of software ever invented, right? The amount of things that you can do and just get by on in that as a tool, I think is really key there. And that's a great point, Kyle. Just as a starting point is like build out the, we'll say minimum viable product or MVP as it's sometimes called in a Google Sheet or in an Excel sheet so that you can understand what types of data is useful, get the structure in place, and then you can take that to somebody else who can then kind of create a more robust system for you over time as well, too. So, yeah, cool, awesome. What other, wins or items do you typically focus on with your clients? Where do you see a lot of success come from in terms of the world of automation and delegation?
I think. Short of throwing out like specific tools or applications that are helpful.
Yeah, I guess even that, we had some people asking about proposal software, for example, in the chat here as we were going through this. So what are some of the common ones that you've found useful?
Quiller is probably my favorite at present. Proposify, PandaDoc are all good ones as well. I'd say those are probably the top three. If you don't have a CRM and need one, HubSpot is, I'd say 99% of the time, probably all you need. But Pipedrive is great as well, and a variety of others. Salesforce is awesome, but I would suggest it's much better at enterprise level than it is for small business, because you probably need a whole team to do design and development on Salesforce versus a lot of the other options that are available. HubSpot, Pipedrive, as examples, you can do it all yourself. One that I have a particular passion for when it comes to IT and password management, there are a lot of great kind of like Chrome extensions that you can do, but Zoho Vault, if you're looking for password management or security for an entire team, you can have, it's very inexpensive. You can have users set up, you can get all of your company passwords in one place and then manage security for people and what they need. So when you get to the point where you've got big teams, you might have hundreds of credentials that have to be navigated. And so that becomes very helpful versus trying to share Google spreadsheets or sticky notes on the bottom of keyboards.
I think that's an important takeaway, right, for anybody watching this, is just as you start to build out more automations, right, and you have more access points and more points of breakage, security becomes an increasingly complex issue just to manage itself, right? And so using things like Zoho Vault, for example, helps to secure that process and make sure that you're protecting your data as well, which would also be an important piece as well. So I like it. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I think Zapier and some other automation tools help to just kind of bring everything together that don't have native APIs. One thing I think that's worth stressing, talking about your bulleted list, right? And you start at high level and then you go sub bullets and you keep breaking it all down. And then you find, issues within your system that could be automated, and you find a solution to make it fit. And then you gotta, there's a lot of change involved in all of that. And as you're making changes in your business, and the market is making changes for you, or pandemics or other weather events that are causing problems. But there's a lot of change that's involved in this. I think we at Catapult, Rory Vaden was one of our speakers last, and he talked about if you're going to delegate something, kind of follow a 30x rule. say, if this is going to be a 5-minute exercise, plan on spending 150 minutes on really training that process onto somebody else so that you never have to deal with it again. And then over time, right, you really realize the ROI on that. I think that mindset is really helpful when you're dealing with automation, is to just expect that it's not going to be right out of the way. A lot of times people will set up an automation and they'll plug in the API, and then it doesn't work exactly the way that they'd wanted it to, and then didn't necessarily plan for the continued time to invest and check and reinvest and check to make sure that you ultimately get it right. So when you are going down this path of automation, just make sure that you're giving your budgeting in enough space to not only find the right solution, to implement the right solution, but then to navigate kind of the technical change management, but then also the behavioral change management of getting people to adapt to a new process. It takes time. It takes time to get it right, but then ultimately you benefit from it thereafter.
I think that's a really important piece. At the end of the day, it's still humans that are using the technology, right? And so the slowness in terms of us to change, especially if we've been doing something, bring you back up here at the end if you got a couple minutes, and we'll be able to do a bit of a Q&A and continue on from there. So thanks so much for your time here today. We'll keep plugging away.
Thank you. Thanks,
awesome.
Gang.
Thanks. So with that, I'm going to jump back into the slide deck here with everybody. So hopefully everybody can see this coming up. Awesome. So thanks again, Kyle, for your time and for using your battery backup. I know it's a precious resource for you here, given the power situation. So, so with all of those pieces that we've sort of talked about at the beginning, Kyle talked about a couple of things. One of the terms that came up here was an API, and I just wanted to slow this down and explain what an API is just before we move forward. An API is an application programming interface, which basically just means, like, how does one piece of software talk to that piece of software? It's the instructions essentially for how they speak together. And so if you're a developer or you know a developer, typically what they can do is take that API and figure out how to get two pieces of software talking with each other. And that's really been one of the big advancements over the last probably 10 years or so, is the concept of open APIs and really building systems that can work with each other, as opposed to being like in individual silos where you can't really get the information out of it. And so that's really allowed you to build quick tools and move very quickly. And we'll talk about some of that here today in terms of building these systems to scale. So this next part here, what we're going to focus on as we get to our next guest, is about building turnkey systems for scale. And so if we think about the first part of today, it was really about getting the mechanics and the pieces in place and going, how do I dissect a process in my business? How do I start to identify some of the things that I might be building out training systems for people, or software that it might solve some of this as well? And then how do I create the whole infrastructure to help me grow? And so just to kind of reiterate, we have that list, but like, what do we do with this now, right? And so the key here is we're going to start with the brain side of things, because that, again, is usually where we don't invest as much. And the reason is because we have this nice fancy list, right? And we go, great, here's the list of how you do something. But just because you have a list of how to actually take these 7 steps to the correct serve technique in tennis does not mean that you're going to be Serena Williams, right? You don't just naturally get the skill. And so this is often the slowest piece, is that we don't spend time slowing down to transfer skill through coaching. And if you think about Serena, right, she's obviously one of the greatest athletes of all time, amazing at what she does. She still has coaches to help dissect what she's doing, give her feedback, work on things. And so if you're looking for more details on coaching, highly encourage you to jump into the dynamic leadership course on the client portal there and go through, the what is coaching actual section there, where Casey breaks down some of the key concepts and gives you some tools that you can use to actually help with the transfer of skill and not just the knowledge that you've just dumped into a bulleted list. So I'm going to give a little bit of a coaching skill hack here today to just go, what is the quick and dirty method to just getting some quick traction to transfer skill with somebody on a particular task? And so one of the key things that I like to do is to take those bulleted lists and build out what I call a do list. And the DO stands for demonstrate and observe. And so the key here is that each of those bullets that we made, I want to make sure that I've dumped that into an Excel sheet that looks something like this, where we have the same items listed down the left-hand side. But now I've got two columns, and I've got a demonstrate and an observed one. And so the quick skill hack is, have I shown them how to create a job posting? Have I demonstrated it? And then have I seen them do one on their own? In each of these boxes, you can record the date when you did each of those things, and you work your way down that list. So you know, one, you've shown them how to do it, and two, that you've actually seen them go out and do it as well. And so the whole purpose of this is to create a bit of a loop here for you, where you're going to build your list coming out of that first 5 steps process that we talked about this morning. You're going to demonstrate, so walk through how to do it. And the big bonus on this, if you want an automation or delegation piece, is record yourself doing it. That's future leverage for you if you have turnover, or if you need to teach somebody else how to do this in the future. You now have a tool that you can actually use to help move things even faster. And then you want to make sure that you observe them doing it. And this is probably the biggest one that I've seen people like skimp on, really, is that you give them a list, you give them an instruction manual on how to do something. You might show them how to do it, but you never really slow down to watch them do it and give them feedback. You may have to go back and demonstrate again, make sure that they have it. And Carly, yep, do-raggy, I like it. So you can maybe explain what do-raggy means in the chat there. That would be great as well. So, but coaching, again, it's all about the transfer of skill. This is where people skip. It's slow. And then this is also where people start wondering, like, why is nothing changing? I built all these systems, nobody's using it. You have to slow it down. It takes time. It's an investment. But as Kyle mentioned, that 30 times rule, we should be really focused on high impact things, right? What are the things that really move the needle in our business, right? Not little things that are just eating up time along the way. And so as we grow in scale as an organization, the other thing that this will lead to is specialization. When you start as an owner, you're sort of running everything. You're good at all of it, right? But as you start to hire out a team, each of those folks on your team will likely become better at all of those individual tasks that you used to all run, because a task that you're currently doing now will become somebody's entire job in the future. And this is both the best and most freeing thing as a business owner, and also the most terrifying, because you as the owner may not be the subject matter expert anymore in the business. It means you're starting to give up some control, but it also means that you're starting to empower your team and have them take more ownership over things. And so this is really where you're starting to shift from that like doer role really in the business into more of the management and the leader of the organization along the way. And so this is where we start to then flip into the bite side of things a little bit. And so a couple of the things that got mentioned about earlier was just the idea of taking all of these individual silos of data in the business and starting to get them connecting together. And so what I'm calling it here is integration software. It takes complex APIs and makes them really point and click. And by point and click, I mean like it's got a visual representation of like all of the information that you can have flow from one system into the next, and you can start to build your processes. So you could have a MailChimp like flow through something else and end up in your Salesforce, for example, or take Salesforce data and push it out the other way as well. And so we're going to look at a couple of different examples. These are some common names up here that you're going to hear whenever you're looking at these different things, like Zapier or Trade.io, Automate.io, or Integromat. These are some very common platforms here. But essentially what we want to do is, you know, now that we've got our people sort of trained, we're working on transferring the skill. Now we want to go back to our list and identify the sub bullets from that category where it won't be brains, but instead it's going to be bites. And so one of the best tools that you can use is actually to go on the websites of something like a Zapier and look at all of the software that it's actually integrated with. I was looking on it yesterday. It's got over 3,000 integrations on Zapier. So you can push and pull information from lots of different systems and get things talking together. You can get the right information in front of the right people in your business. And so just to give you a quick example, this is their app library. And so down the left-hand side, if you're looking for a piece of software about, human resources or business intelligence, right, or something like that, you can start to sort and see what is already existing and what functionality is already baked into it through something like Zapier. And so you'll see some common names here like Google Sheets, Gmail, lots of Google products obviously have this, but things like Typeform. So if you have form information, you collect the information in your Typeform, you may want that to show up in your CRM, or maybe you want it in QuickBooks, or maybe you want it in ActiveCampaign, all of these things along the way. So the way that these work is that there's 3 different pieces of functionality typically in them. The first thing we'll talk about here is a trigger. And so I've got QuickBooks up here. And so the way you can think about triggers are, these are things that happen in the software. So in this case, like if you have a new account or you have a new customer or a new invoice or a new sales receipt, these are all things that happen in QuickBooks. And so basically when one of these triggers happens, you can create an action then in the next step. So you could create a new customer, for example, you could create an invoice, you could create a credit memo or update a customer. You can basically take an action in a piece of software. And the real cool part about all of this is that you can mix and match these triggers and actions. So you could have a trigger in QuickBooks take an action in MailChimp, for example. And so that's really where the power of this comes into play here. And we'll take a look at some more examples here as we move through today. So the last thing here is really searches, which is, all right, we're going to look for something in a piece of software. So in this case, we could try to find a customer or a product or an account, and then we can do something like update it by taking an action in it afterwards. And so just to give you a quick little example here, so what does this really mean? So let's say I get emails coming in all the time, right? And when I get a new email, that could be the trigger. So I got a new email in my Gmail inbox. And what I wanted to do is I want the software to look and say, hey, this email has an attachment. By default, I just want to take this attachment and I want you to put all of the attachments on my emails into this Dropbox folder. So that makes it easier for me maybe to pull up any of these attachments that are coming in. Or for example, you could have an email just dedicated to shipping orders or something like that. So all of the shipping orders are just ending up in this Dropbox. I could then have somebody pull all these files out of the Dropbox and then take the next action from there. I may also want to make this more complex and add another step in here and say, all right, alert me in Slack about the new Dropbox file. So just different ways that you can stack these together to actually create the workflows that you're looking for. And so the whole thing about building turnkey systems to scale is we take each of these individual pieces and we start to stack them on top of each other. So at the beginning, we talked about automation and delegation workflow and breaking that down, and we got our 5-step process. That's usually where we start. Then we identify our brains and bites. When it's brains, we can start to do things like build out do sheets, and then we're going to focus on coaching for skill, right? If it's the bites, we're going to look for integration software to help us identify the tools that could automate some of these processes and build out workflows on the digital side of things. And then lastly, we need to make sure that we have a plan in place to manage the system. And the key here is that we're delegating, we're not abdicating responsibility for this, because at the end of the day, as the owner, you're still responsible for the outcome. And so we need to make sure that we have a system in place to actually track that things are working, and that making sure that we're not just dumping and walking away. So it always requires minimal maintenance and some level of involvement, and make sure that you're committed to that whenever you're looking at these pieces along the way. So as I bring this all together here, you may have seen this in the past. This is obviously the propeller that we talk about as you're growing and scaling the business. And so you've got your capacity and your growth, and we're focused on all these different things. And in my experience, a couple of the things that come up is that there's a lot of focus usually on the sales and marketing side of things around automation and delegation. We're trying to work to get systems and processes in place to take these off our plate. But one of the things that I often see skipped is actually in the recruiting and the people side of things in the business. And so again, this goes back to that coaching slide that I talked about earlier of focusing on transferring skill and making sure you're spending time developing your people. Investing in that is actually going to help all of these move that much faster in the future. And so with that, I want to actually invite up my next guest here, who Morgan I see is coming on here. And so this is Morgan, everybody. Thanks, Morgan, for joining us here today. She's going to talk a little bit about her experience with building turnkey systems to help scale. And so I know, Morgan, you've got a couple of things in here that you're going to focus on today as part of the conversation. But, I talked about due sheets in my section here that just before this as well. I also know you're a big believer in something called an SOP, right? And so could you just take a second and maybe explain to the group, like, how do these two concepts sort of fit together? And I guess what is an SOP as well?
Sure, of course. Yeah, I think that this actually ties in really well. Basically, one main challenge that businesses or a question that businesses face when they're in growth mode is, how do I make sure the quality and actually, just like kind of you hit on, of work that the company delivers can be maintained, especially as you bring in new members and the team is starting to grow. So, one thing that I say often is delegation hesitation can kill productivity. So
I like it.
Yeah.
So write that down in the chat.
Yeah,
good.
Totally. Go ahead. So turning these SOPs, so these standard operating procedures, into actionable processes, tasks, and deadlines, is a crucial part of that. So starting with just like, what is that? It's basically you're taking a set of instructions and you're laying it out step by step, just as easily as you said, like 1, 2, and 3.
Sure.
And then you're taking a specific task or set of tasks and including those steps and sub-steps. So its purpose is essentially to guide your employees through the implementation of critical tasks that must get done, and they must get done thoroughly, accurately, and consistently.
Makes sense. One of the things I've heard is the value of checklists, even, right, in businesses, right, and pilots, for instance, they've got their checklist before they take off in the plane, totally. Right, and a lot of these complex jobs rely on checklists to make sure that every single piece is done properly. And so I guess what I'm hearing you say is the value in the business of having that standard operating procedure is that you get the consistent outcome, because you don't want a pilot obviously skipping steps as part of the takeoff here process.
Or like check the landing gear.
Yeah, exactly. Probably double check maybe a couple times on those things as well. So that makes sense. And I've heard you talk about this before in the past as well, as just your belief in terms of having some of these clear standard operating procedures and like boundaries in place, especially on the recruitment side that I talked about earlier, and the onboarding piece specifically. Could you maybe speak to that for a second here for the group?
Yeah, totally. So, part of this is, as a business owner, we have a lot of these things in our head. And so it's important to now get this out into some sort of, procedure or process that can be communicated and like I said, replicated. So and I think some of my clients around here now, like, they can probably attest to this. I am a huge 30, 60, 90 fan. I think it's extremely important.
What do you mean by 30, 60, 90? Sorry?
Yeah, totally. So like in the onboarding, whether you're onboarding a new employee, like their first 30 days, their first 60 days, their first 90 days, or if someone's taking on a new role within the company.
Got it.
So, best way to look at it is like your first 30 days is proficiency. Second 30 days, 60 days is competency, and then 90 days is mastery. And having a system that's in place, and that can be, parts of this can be automated. Not only does it create more engagement for your team members, not only are they more productive and they'll want to stick around, but it ensures that they have all their resources to be successful. And at the same time, it makes it easier for you to manage the onboarding processes and make sure they're efficient and effective on your end.
Got it. So one of the big pieces that you're talking about here in terms of the context of growing and scaling is starting to build that infrastructure out so that it's clear, like, what do they need to do in the first 30, 60, 90, have that documented. You might be using technology to help manage parts of this process and make sure that certain things are done at certain times. But then it ties into a bit of what we were talking about earlier too, around the skill development piece of it, and not skimping on that as an owner. If you're really looking to delegate tasks over time, right? Because if you don't do that, they're never going to get to that mastery phase that you were describing as well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times there's a misconception that an SOP needs to be complex. It's wrong. That's wrong.
Okay.
You really want to make sure it's just well constructed, that it's simple and it's broken down into those bite-sized pieces, so you're not trying to eat the elephant, of instructions that are as clear as possible. And really you just want them to be accurate, and you want them to describe the task. So in the example of that 30, 60, 90, you're not trying to dazzle the employee with the complexity. You're trying to simplify it so that they feel really supported and that they feel that they can actually achieve and be successful within the role.
Got it. Yeah, it's you don't want to overwhelm somebody either, right? Especially if they're new employee, or they're changing positions as well within the organization, or taking on more responsibility even, right?
Yeah,
in addition to
totally.
what they were doing previously. So
yeah,
awesome.
and a simple way to do it is just like, outline the process. Start with your checklist, go to subtasks, detail any of the task instruction, and then think about the types of learning. Do you need to add any visuals? Do you need to add any images, any like dynamic variables? And then within that, here comes your automation. You can add in forms or surveys through each one of the, let's say, like landmark things that need to be completed. And now this helps automate your review process.
So you're saying like you could almost trigger a survey at 30 days automatically that goes, answer these questions, so you can make sure that they actually know what they're supposed to know at 30 days. And if they don't, it gives you an opportunity to intervene, for example, do whatever training they might need to make sure that they are moving at the speed that you need them to take that on and be proficient. Is that fair?
Totally.
I love it.
And then you have other automations within that. You have your, email reminders, your scheduling, your recurring schedules, and then this is where your APIs come in.
Yeah, no, I often joke that the recurring meeting is one of the most underutilized pieces of automation, right? Because you can just go like, we're going to meet consistently. We're going to decide now what that looks like and set it up, and it's just going to run, right? And we show up and we do what we need to do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's great. And if you think about other parts of life, that works too, right? So same with the gym, right? When you go to the gym consistently and you have those consistent habits, typically you're going to increase productivity, you're going to have better results and better outcomes along the way too. So it's great. Love it.
The last piece I'll say to that is just make sure that you're tracking those results. So use a process dashboard.
Great.
That helps you prioritize the task, and then it gets this feedback loop going for you, which again ties into a really good review process.
Love it. So really your focus on the turnkey system piece of it is like the management process that goes on top of all of these individual pieces, making sure you're following up on that, you're reviewing it. Are you getting the results that you expected? All of those other parts along the way. Is that fair?
Yeah, totally. Yep.
On the management dashboard, we got a quick last question here for you. Then, any specific tools that you've found particularly useful, or that you like to use, including Excel, Google Sheets, doesn't matter. So
yeah, I mean, I can't say enough. Like, I think that to your point exactly, like there are so many automations even within Excel or Google Sheets. You can even have an email reminder triggered and an email sent from Google Sheets. Like it's
Right.
pretty amazing. So to the same extent as we're saying, like, don't overcomplicate an SOP, don't overcomplicate building, just like Kyle said, figure out what you really need to do first, and then start looking for your automation.
Got it. Yeah. And so that takes us all the way back to rule number 1, right? Is don't focus on those things that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. Because if it's on your calendar and it's just taking up time, but it's not adding any value, probably look at cutting before you start looking at automating or delegating that. So
totally.
Awesome.
I have one more golden nugget.
Go. Shoot it.
Task automation, you now graduate to task orchestration. So you get to just watch the symphony happen.
I love it. Task automation to orchestration. So that'll be our next webinar, I'm guessing, in terms of topics here that you'll be.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Great. I appreciate the time here today, Morgan. Thanks so much for your insights, and we'll ask you maybe back up on the stage here at the end for a quick Q&A.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Thanks again. All right. So let's keep this moving along here. I'm just going to do this quick, in theory, and we'll pull up the slides. Maybe. There we go. So So a couple things. Thanks again, Morgan, for all of your insights in terms of your experience of thinking through the structure and how we start to build out these management and leadership systems to actually achieve that turnkey growth. And so just to define, I guess, the turnkey wording there, you may not be familiar with it, but the idea is, a turnkey home, for example, doesn't need any renovations. You get your key, you open the door, and away you go. The house is all set up. Everything works properly here. So thanks, Vince, there, just for the reminder. If you have questions, if you want to drop those in the chat right now, I'll be pulling Morgan and Kyle back in at the end here, and we'll be able to field some questions here for you. So just before we wrap up here today, I wanted to walk through just a couple quick automation examples. And so I was trying to really think of something that could be valuable to almost any business, right? And think about how you could use this in your company as well. And so one of the key things here that I just looked at was, well, almost everybody has somebody paying you at some point, right? So let's say we have a QuickBooks trigger, right, on this. And then what we should really be doing is we should make sure that we're communicating effectively with all of our current clients, right? To make sure that they're aware of offerings, maybe new things that we have coming up here. And so this is just a quick little screenshot of a Zapier integration. And in the deck down here, there'll be a link that you can actually go straight to it. But this one looks at it and goes, all right, when I get a new customer, add that customer to my subscriber list, right? And you can put them into something like MailChimp, so that way you can continue to stay in touch with those people over time. And so if you take this as an example, you could also, instead of having MailChimp, you could maybe send them a feedback form, right? You could trigger an email that's got a link to a form that then asks them for feedback, right? You could send them a link to something like a Google review even, and have them putting reviews on Google for you to help all your SEO and everything else as well along the way. And so this just sort of was a quick overview of something where I'm like, I think a lot of people just struggle to build something to stay in touch with the existing clients that you have, and making sure that you have a system to actually do that can be super valuable. So this is just a quick little one that I wanted to touch on there before we go. So we covered a lot of ground here today. So there's probably some questions here that you're going to have. I'd highly recommend you take some of these and work on it with your advisor and add it to your roadmap in terms of items that you can discuss in the future here. We can only cover so much, obviously, in this hour here today. Lastly, if there was something that you saw today and you're like, oh man, I really wish I had that. I saw somebody mention a screenshot here as we were going through. If you want to watch these again, these do exist in the client portal. So if you click on courses and then go to the CEO webinars, you'll be able to find all of our past webinars as well. So know that this is in here as a resource for you to tap into along the way. Lastly, a couple other key things here that I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of is that Spring Catapult registration is now open officially as of this morning. So if you log in to the client portal, you'll see the countdown there. We're 62 days away from Spring Catapult. You can click on there, and if you're logged into your account, it's pretty much a one-button registration process. So we try to really streamline that. There's a lot of automation and Zapier in the background if you're curious. But that will be on April 22nd. Our fall catapult will be on October 21st. So more information will come out around that in the summertime here. Paige dropped our catapult link in there that will take you straight to the agenda and information in there, as well as the registration button. So feel free to take advantage of that here today, and make sure you register. All clients can register for free. So a couple of upcoming events here. March 4th, we've got our community speed networking again. So that was a big hit last month. So we're going to continue that moving forward. If you haven't taken advantage of that, meet some of the other business owners in the community here. People are making connections, finding other vendors, things like this, even clients. And then we have our next CEO webinar on March 18th, which is about increasing conversion in your sales process. And so all of these can be registered for in the client portal as well. And lastly, I just want to make a quick pitch here. We are growing, and so we are also recruiting. So if you do know of any other badass entrepreneurs here that might be interested in helping us to continue to grow and scale as well, you can send them over to cultivateadvisors.com and click on the Join Our Team button there in the top menu. And basically, they can get all the information about the roles and stuff that we're recruiting for on there too. And so lastly, I will just kill my slides here, and we've got Morgan up here and maybe Kyle. I don't know if he's still around or maybe if his power died or not, but there we go. We got Kyle as well. And so we have everybody here for the last kind of 5 minutes or so. If you did get a chance to get your question answered, you can always go into the client portal and just post your question in the client portal there, and we'll work to respond to those after today if you had something come up in there. So I'm just going to ask a couple of these that were in here. So work backwards. Has anyone paid for an outside tech consultant to design an automated sales and communication process? And if so, how much did it cost? So I'll just ask Morgan and Kyle examples here. Have you found much success in terms of working with other outside vendors in that type of space?
Giant red flag around just sensitivity of what kind of a black hole that could lead to. So I would expect it to be thousands of dollars. And I think it would be, if you want to try to put some scope to it and avoid some scope creep, it would be really important, as we've spent, the last hour really talking about, know what you need it to be, figure out how you can try to make it yourself, preferably in Excel, and putting some kind of manual systems together, prove out what's most important related to that process that you'd want to have automated and built out. And then you have something very as specific as possible to go approach a developer with, so that both sides can be clear on what it is and what it won't be, and what it then would cost.
Got it. So work on kind of the pieces again, just going back to the simple parts of it, right? Like break it down into the component parts, work on the pieces, and then you can bring something more holistic together to get scoped from a developer, something like that over time.
Yeah, I would even just say, like, to echo that, like having the framework, the if-then, if this happens, then this, right? Those triggers, that's the most important part. If one doesn't want to go and actually plug in those automations, sure, then you can bring someone, but at least you have those guardrails up. So it's not like, oh, we're going to create this whole new thing for you, and then you're like, this isn't what I needed.
Right. Yeah, no, that's fair, right? And it's the people piece of this as well, is like, what do the people need? Does this process fit with them? You can do it on the demo version first, make sure it fits before you start implementing it across the whole company too. So like it. And if anybody's got to jump here at the end, I understand. I'll try to stick around here for a couple minutes past the end time. But we had a question here on how do you advise a smaller team bring attention to discovering more of what was discussed today consistently while feeling the pressure of more urgent managers while scaling a business? So any feedback or advice, like how do they, it's almost like, how do you break the cycle, right? And take the time to invest in some of this stuff, knowing that it'll create time and space in the future, but when you're feeling the pressure right now. Any quick thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go on kind of the topic that I was touching on, which is, the onboarding and making sure that even if it's not onboarding, if you're just like restructuring and resetting roles, the most important part is to spend the time doing this, because not only does it help retain employees and increase satisfaction, but it also helps the bottom line.
Got it. I like it.
I'll add real quick to that, time tracking. People don't know what they don't know, so have everybody on the team, everybody do a week or two of tracking their time, and then when you compile all of that data together, you might find some stuff that maybe within one person, it's not that significant, but when everyone on the team is doing the same task, then that might elevate the urgency for a better system.
I like it. Yeah, just to piggyback on that, like, I mentioned recurring appointments as being underutilized. It's like, decide what you're going to commit to this. Start with 30 minutes a week and put a recurring appointment in there to look at this for 30 minutes a week and just chip away at it over time, right? You've gotten this far without it. So if you just take the first step, start with a small piece and then move from there. And if you have a problem with that, get a workout buddy the same way. Find somebody else that can work on it with you at the same time, so you're both more committed to actually working on it. So maybe you can find them at the community networking piece too. So
that accountability piece.
The accountability piece is the hardest thing on anything, right? So I love it. Kyle, do you have any automated marketing or content repurposing tools or tips or recommendations?
No, we were kind of kicking that one around in the chat. Whatever was suggested is one that I hadn't heard of. So always fun to learn of new tools and software to go check out. So one to go look at. But artificial intelligence, when it comes to marketing language, I'm just not convinced today anyway. Could change in a few months that I would want to trust messaging nuance to AI. So as we were kind of talking in the chat, it was like you need people to really do that well, and then you can look at automation and how to deploy it and schedule it and make it easier to push out. But maybe I just discovered a new tool that would answer that question differently that I get to go research now. But I don't know on content creation if that should be automated just yet.
Love it. Got it. Yeah, and that's what goes back to what you said earlier when we were talking, is this is a constant evolution. There's constantly new tools every day, right? And so also just being conscientious of not just getting sucked into the newest red shiny ball, right? Like that can be another piece that you can also get buried in as you're going through this too, because there'll be new things tomorrow. I guarantee you there's people thinking about it and creating it, and then you're going to have to learn it all as well. And so sometimes staying with like familiar tools, familiar processes, but just tweaking them to get more streamlined automation through it can actually make you that much more efficient too. So cool.
Yeah. Just taking that the shiny ball temptation, right? You find a new piece of software, and then you look at all of its features that it can do, and then you start trying to just take advantage of all of those, and then find yourself doing stuff that isn't necessary or helpful to what your core process ultimately is. So a great reminder to just continue to lean into what do I need and what's most important for my business. And what are the things that can ultimately help me do that better while minimizing other distractions?
And remember, the overall mantra is to get out of the weeds and to work on the business. Yeah. So don't get caught in another time suck.
Yes. Right. That's great. I love it. I'll ask here just to ping if anybody else has other questions here in the chat. We will we'll give it a second here. There's some in the chat there, I'm sure, that are buried up there, but if you do have any, if you just drop them in there now, we'll take a minute here and just stay on here and see if anybody posts anything. But looks like nothing's coming in right now, so we must have done a great job. I can only assume that we've answered everybody's questions about this. So there's a lot of work to be done, I'm sure, with everybody here moving forward, though. So I want to thank everybody again for their time. I want to thank Morgan and Kyle both for your time as well, and your insights and wisdom here today. So thank you so much for making this great. And so thank you to everybody else for participating here today. If you do have more questions about this as they come up in the future, remember, you can always go into the community portal, put those questions, make them a post in there. We'll see them and we'll chime in along the way. So thanks again, everybody. Enjoy. Stay safe, everybody.